There's a march coming up Saturday. Have you heard about this? The march is going to take place in 500 cities around the United States and the world. What do you think this march is about? It's one more example of trying to resist this fascist prick who's now president of the United States. This is a march in support of scientific research. And the part of this story that's interesting to me, scientists and researchers and science advocates are expected to be the leading vanguard of this march. Now, let's pause for a second and understand something. Scientists have tried as much as they can to stay out of politics. They're not about politics. Politics is bullshit. They're about science. They're about medicine. They're about new discoveries. And they understand, scientists do, that so much of the research they do is funded by whatever screwed up political party happens to be in charge at any given time. Consequently, scientists have stayed out of all this political bullshit that doesn't amount to anything except insanity. And, well, it does amount to something. It amounts to the destruction of everything under Trump. But not anymore. Science Times says this thing was put together in late January this year, and it's called the March for Science. And apparently it has gone from a grassroots social media campaign into a honest-to-God force of scientific advocacy. And it's attracted support from more than 220 official science organizations. That's the kind of shit this country is in under the Trump gangsters, where scientists have to take to the streets. And you know why? You know what Trump has done? He and his gang of crazy people, they are slashing and burning research dollars, education, science funding, NASA, everything. They're just butchering it. The marchers and the activists who organized all of these science organizations will have to address, this is not a one-off, as they say. There are all sorts of things planned subsequent to the demonstrations. Dr. Carolyn Weinberg, who's a public health researcher and co-chairwoman of the march, said, quote, "We have no intention of letting this stop after April 22nd. That's a Sunday. She said, "I will have considered it pretty much a failure if after April 22nd, all of this movement and all of this passion dissipates." Now, the main march is going to happen in Washington, but there's also going to be rallies in so-called medical hubs like Boston or technology centers like San Francisco. And even in the heart of oil and gas country, Oklahoma City is going to have one. Hope Sheila is aware of that. Go get him, Sheila.
49.2%.
What?
49.2%.
John has gotten 49.2%. Is that the final?
No.
That's not the final. He needs 50%. We'll keep you posted. Now, according to the organizers, the strength of these events that are not in Washington, D.C., the ones in Boston and San Francisco and Oklahoma City and around the country, around the world, actually, the strength of those events will be important indicators of where activism generated by the march will lead in the future. You know, everything's at stake with the Trump administration. These people are just absolute, well, they're gangsters, but what they are doing, what this Trump administration is doing is just unspeakable shit. I mean, it really is. Anyway, April 22nd also happens to be Earth Day. So for the past 3 months, Dr. Weinberg and volunteers have been coordinating with the Earth Day Network, it's called. They partnered with them because the Earth Day Network has a permit for the National Mall on Earth Day. So they're going to combine this. And the schedule is sort of teach-in sessions early in the day, a 4-hour rally then featuring Bill Nye, the science guy, Dr. Mona Hanna-Attisha, the pediatrician who helped expose lead poisoning in Flint, Michigan, Lydia Via Komarov, who helped produce insulin from bacteria, among others, before there'll be a lot of speakers, but those are 3, and then the march. Now, the way this started, anyway, for Dr. Weinberg, she says that the idea began in late January when she heard what the Trump organization had ordered federal agencies to do. And that is we talked about this, to temporarily halt all external communications that inform the public. Everything. And she found, using her Twitter account, she found other scientists who shared her concerns about that. The rallying cry of this march is science, not silence. And it was inspired by the Women's March on Washington, the day after this worthless piece of shit took over as president. Kishore Hari, who does outreach for the University of California, San Francisco, and has worked as a liaison between the national group and the satellite marches, he says, quote, the idea that scientists are leading the march started to evaporate when these smaller towns started to show up. I started to see teachers, farmers, and factory workers, non-scientists, are leading these marches, and that's uplifting, end quote. Now, going back to Oklahoma City, one of the organizers there, she's a clinical psychologist, Jocelyn Barton. She said that the rally was an opportunity to show that her city, Oklahoma City, which is a big oil town in a conservative region of the country, is as passionate about science as other cities. She said, quote, I'm proud of people who are willing to say, you can be a person of faith and a scientist. You can be politically conservative and advocate for science. And that's what's happening here. Now, as usual, after this organization established their website and started putting their mission statements together, they started getting heavy-duty scrutiny, right? People were picking apart every word of this organization's public message. And one of the earliest critiques came from a guy named Steven Pinker, who is a renowned psychology professor at Harvard. And he criticized the march's diversity statement that was put up on their website. He said, quote, they make the march seem like an extension of the identity politics and victimology that have discredited academia in the eyes of much of the rest of the world. End quote. Far be it from me to argue with somebody as well-educated as a renowned psychology professor at Harvard, but Dr. Pinker, you're full of shit as a Christmas goose. The only people who've made a big deal about identity politics and so-called victimology are people on the right who continue, political and religious right, especially the religious right, who try to cloud every issue using these buzzwords like political correctness, victimology, identity politics. So, Dr. Pinker, you're full of shit. You really are. You're just absolutely full of shit. Just go back to Harvard and do your teaching and let the activists and the organizers take care of this. You know, get your ass back in your classroom where you belong. But in response to this guy's criticism, the organizers went ahead and changed that part of their website, the language, where it concerned diversity. God, that's a bad word. You know, it's just a bad word. Now, that had a ricochet or what am I trying to say? Yeah, a ricochet effect. Because it upset other scientists who felt the organization was reproducing the status quo in science, which they're trying to fight against. That's the science in which women and minorities have been historically marginalized. So you're not allowed to say that. Because if you say that, some asshole like Dr. Steven Pinker at Harvard will stick his head up out of his books and say, well, wait a minute, you're talking about women and minorities again? Oh, man, victim, which is horseshit. It's historical truth. God, these people irritate the hell out of me. They really do. They really do. Ayanna Elizabeth Johnson, a marine biologist and the March's co-director of partnerships and a member of its diversity team, said diversity and inclusion, more buzzwords, right? More things for the right-wingers to pick at. Diversity and inclusion have been core parts of the march since its beginning. But the group has had several, what she calls brutally honest conversations to make sure their messaging aligned with their values. The diversity concerns have also been joined with with worries among some scientists that they will lose credibility with the public for taking part in the march. You know, that somehow this march is going to label them as politically inclined to the left or the right. This is the kind of bullshit we're living in. And march organizers have pointed out that science has always been political. From the imprisonment of Galileo to the creation of the atomic bomb, but the fact is, the polarization of some scientific issues or scientific facts. Let's see if we can think of one. Let's think. Oh, I know one. Global warming. The polarization over some of these issues, like global warming, really got intense during the 80s and the 90s, and now. Now, I can remember in the 80s and 90s, maybe you can too, that one of the big environmental issues back then was the depleting ozone layer. Remember that? Fluorohydrocarbons? In all that spray shit everybody was using, everything was a spray. Remember that? Spray. And they were using chlorofluorocarbons or whatever they're called. I guess it's chlorofluorocarbons. Who gives a shit? It was a chemical that would just eat the ozone layer, not ozone down here caused by smog and shit, but the ozone that protects the human population, among others, from the nastiness of radiation. You know, the ozone layer goes, we cook. So many of these things are so interrelated. Well, if you remember, the voices that said that was bullshit were very few and far between, and as a result, the chemicals that were destroying the ozone were banned. In this country, all over the world, everybody stopped using them because it was very quick. A very quick point was made. If we keep doing this, remember the ozone over the Antarctic, for God's sake? So it didn't take much from science to convince people, you can't do this. We got to stop. So we stopped. Because science at the time was not a political football. And when I say political football, you think of one team kicking at the other and the other team kicking. Bullshit. It's the right-wingers, the Christian right and the political right who have done everything they can to destroy people's faith in science. Even down to the point of saying vaccinations bring about autism, for Christ's sake. Anything that these right-wingers can do to cause people to lose faith in science and gravitate toward this religious bullshit, they will do and have done. And this is a reaction to that. A sociologist at Michigan State University who has studied the politicalization, there you go, politicalization of science said, quote, you start seeing headlines that say environmentalists are the new Marxists, end quote. Where do you see those headlines? You see it in right-wing bullshit publications and Christian bullshit publications. That's where you see it. And McWright, the sociologist at Michigan State, said that sentiment was built among conservatives during the Clinton and George W. Bush administrations and exploded during the Obama presidency, with climate change denial becoming a kind of litmus test for conservatism. If you believe the planet is heating up, you must be some goddamn liberal Marxist. If you reject the science that shows the planet is heating up, then you're a good Christian conservative. Because you know, God would never destroy the world by heating it up. Would he? Anyway, this Dr. McWright at Michigan State said the March for Science will probably further this partisan divide over scientific issues, especially if there are no prominent conservative speakers. Well, there won't be. Because in order to be a prominent conservative speaker, you first of all have to be an inarticulate slogan spouting asshole. And if you are, why would a science march want you? Man.